Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to Day 5 of official Shadows Over Innistrad spoilers. And we have a lot of cards to look at today. 19 cards have been spoiled over the last 24 hours. Now, a lot of these are a little more commons, uncommons, limited build type cards, but let's just jump in and get going since I don't want this video to be too long. So our first card of the day comes to us from a Korean spoiler, and it's Eternal Vigil. 2 white, 1 generic. It's an enchantment, non-token creatures you control gain +1/+1 in vigilance. First off, in limited, I'll say this, it's not going to be great in all limited decks, but if you have a heavy creature build, this will be very good for you. Being able to spread out the extra power and toughness and give your creatures vigilance is going to be a nice advantage. Other than that, I don't really know where this goes. There could potentially be a white weenie deck out there. There seems to be some pieces that you could put together to form that in standard, but I don't think that deck wants to take a turn off to play this. Even though you are getting a great bonus from it, I think that deck just wants to keep putting pressure on and keep putting more creatures out as opposed to trying to make what you have bigger, if that makes sense. So I don't really know if it's an auto include in that deck. Obviously we have to see the rest of the set and kind of test this out a little bit to know for sure, but I feel like there might be better things at the 3 spot for that type of deck. Other than that, the fact that it's non-token creatures makes it maybe not quite as good in, say, Commander or Cube when there's other cards out there you could use that do affect all creatures. And a lot of times the token creatures get the best benefit out of a card like this because you can still continue to generate them while you play this on turn 3 or turn 4. So, I don't know. I think it's a fine limited card. Maybe standard, but we'll have to stay tuned for that one. Next is Paranoid Parrish Blade. 1 white, 2 generic. It's a 3/2 human soldier, and if you have Delirium, it gets +1/+0 and first strike. I think this is a fine limited card. I don't mind paying 3 for a 3/2 in limited. I'm pretty happy with that. And if I happen to be able to get Delirium and I have a 4/2 for a striker, well, that's pretty awesome. But I'm not even necessarily counting on that, and I'm still okay playing the card. It's still hard to say how easy or hard Delirium is going to be to get in both limited as well as standard. We'll know more, I think, as the rest of the set gets revealed, especially more of the commons. But at this point, I'm still happy with this as a limited playable card. Thalia's Lieutenant. 1 white, 1 generic. It's a 1/1 human soldier. When this enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other human you control. When another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. So this is pretty cheap, and if you're playing with a lot of humans, you'll get some benefit out of this. So when you draft, this is a nice draft around me card, and we're going to see a few of these today. They almost feel like creature type lords, but instead of the old all X gets +1/+1 and something, they're a little more creative, and I think that's really cool. And this is a good example of that. We'll see some more in a few minutes. But in limited, if I can maybe first pick this and then start grabbing a lot of humans, I could put together potentially a nice little human tribal deck. If I have a lot of humans in sealed and I pull this, then same sort of thing. Other than that, I don't really see this being a thing in standard, but it is a little early to say for sure because there is so much of the set we haven't seen yet, and there might be some like killer humans out there that we feel like we want to build a deck around. As of right now, I don't know if we're quite there, but still a great limited card, and I think it could be potentially fun in Commander if you have some sort of human tribal like soldiers or warriors or something like that. Next is a card that comes to us from a Spanish language spoiler, and it's Confirmed Suspicions. 2 blue, 3 generic. It's an instant, counter target spell, investigate 3 times. So hard counters in limited are good. Hard counters for 5 sometimes are a little awkward because you'd like to cast it earlier and you can't. It sits in your hand for a while. But you can always rely on the fact that when your opponent goes to cast their big bomb, if you have this and you can tap the 5 mana, then you're going to be at a good advantage. And this gives you a little bit of an extra advantage because it also lets you get 3 clue tokens, which in the long term is going to turn into card advantage. So I do like this in limited. It's a rare, so you won't see tons of it. It's just fine as a one of. I probably wouldn't want to run 2 of these in my limited build, but I think it's going to be good in most cases for you, especially if you're playing a slower, grindier strategy, a little more controlling. In standard, I feel like this is maybe a little too pricey for what it's doing. I do like the clue tokens a lot, but they do take more resources to open, which in standard you have to be really careful how you're using your resources. So for that reason, maybe it's in some sideboards for some control mirror matchups, perhaps, but that would be at best. I think the length will see that in standard. Next is Daring Sleuth. 1 blue, 1 generic, human rogue, 2/1, and when you sacrifice a clue, transform, and it becomes Bearer of Overwhelming Truths, human wizard, 3/2 with prowess, and when this deals combat damage to a player, investigate. So the first thing I want to draw attention to is the art here. This sleuth is looking at these like tentacle things, and now they're on him, and they're also bringing the lamps to life or something, but they do have a very Eldrazi feel to them. Just want to point that out. But having said that, where's this card good? This card is great if it's flipped. However, flipping it is making you kind of climb through some hoops here. You're paying 2 for 2/1, which isn't super exciting. You have to get a clue counter, then you have to go ahead and sacrifice it and not use it to draw a card to flip this. And sure, then you do get a 3/2 prowess that could potentially get you more clue counters if you can do combat damage to a player. But by that point in the game, is it too late? Is my question. So limited, I'm not super excited about this in maybe a lot of limited builds. I'd have to be real confident that I have a lot of cheap ways to get clue counters early to flip this card early. If I don't have this confidence, I'm probably skipping this card. And same thing for, say, even standard constructed. I think this is just way too inconsistent for me to decide I'm going to throw this in my deck and hope that it becomes a 3/2 prowess creature and can do some work for me. Jasus Scrutiny. 1 blue, 1 generic, it's an instant. Target creature gets -4, -0 until end of turn. Investigate. Here's another just decent limited card, and that's just fine. Blue doesn't have a lot of ways to remove creatures, and they traditionally have more tempo play, so this combat trick works as removal for blue in a lot of cases. So because of that, you'll be happy to run maybe 1 or even 2 of these in your blue build, just because you need it for removal during combat. And that's kind of it. Not a whole lot more to say about it. Manic Scribe. 1 blue, 1 generic, human wizard, 0/3. When this enters the battlefield, each opponent puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if you have Delirium, that player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library in his or her graveyard. Alright, so this one's a little painful. Here's why. If I'm playing this in limited, let's say I'm drafting, and I draft a few of these. Maybe I can even get my hands on 3 or 4 of these. Nobody wants them. They keep coming up. They're uncommon, so I keep drafting them. Maybe I'm drafting 1 or other 2 kind of good mill cards, and I think I have a good mill strategy here. I put this card out relatively early in the game. I get Delirium. Now I'm milling my opponent, and they only have a 40-card deck, so they're on a clock now. But the only issue here is in the world of Innistrad, putting cards in the graveyard can be a great benefit to your opponent. In some cases, it's almost like drawing 3 cards a turn. You're almost letting them Ancestral Recall every turn. Now, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it could certainly make winning the game difficult, even if they are on a clock. I would be very hesitant to go with this strategy. It's a big risk. It could have big reward, don't get me wrong, if you draft that deck. But when you're drafting, you're really going to have to get lucky with your draft, number 1. And number 2, you're going to have to really get lucky with your matchups too. So I don't know. I don't really see myself taking that risk in most cases in limited. And as far as constructed goes, it's not going to mill fast enough for it to matter when you're looking at 60-card decks, or far be it even when you're looking at Commander 100-card decks. So I don't really like this card too much. I mean, it's kind of a fun kitchen table card, and that's probably why it exists, but other than that, maybe if you feel like you want to take a big risk in limited, you could try it out and draft. Ongoing Investigation. 1 blue, 1 generic, it's an enchantment. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, investigate. Pay a green and 1, exile a creature card from your graveyard, investigate, and you gain 2 life. So the life gain isn't non-consequential, especially if you're going up against a really aggressive deck, and maybe you have a black-red opponent in limited, and they're just hitting you early on with a lot of stuff before you can get your board state moving. So that could be okay to just gain a little life in the mid to late game to try to get your feet back under you. Other than that, I don't know. I don't like taking turn 2 off to play this, with the potential of maybe getting tokens that maybe I'll be able to have mana later to turn into card draw. It just seems a little too up in the air for me. So I could pull this out of my sideboard in limited if I feel like I needed a little bit of bonus and life gain and I happen to be in Simic colors, but I think it has a very limited role in most cases. Trail of Evidence. 1 blue, 2 generic. It's an enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, investigate. Here's another one I'm not super crazy about. These enchantments in blue, and again, we haven't seen the whole set. Maybe there's some sort of mini enchantment matters theme in blue, which might make these better, but as of today anyway, I really don't want to put this down on turn 3 and then have to rely on the fact that I need to cast instants or sorceries to investigate and then get more mana to turn those in for cards. Card advantage is great, but I'm just going through so much to get it where there's other things I could be doing with my time and my resources. So I'm just not feeling this one. In limited, your creatures are going to be the heaviest part of your deck in most cases. You're probably not running a whole ton of instants or sorceries. So I just don't really see what this card is doing. As far as constructed goes, standard, again, there's no heavy instant or sorcery deck, at least not yet. Keep in mind, we still have a lot of cards to see, and this will stay in standard for a while before it rotates out. So this could change, or it could even be a clue of something to come. I do have a theory that maybe the next set or next block may have a stronger instant and sorcery theme, because there seems to be a lot of nods to that here, which aren't really going anywhere yet. So that could be the case, and this could become a better card in the future, but right now just don't really see too much of a use for it. Even in Commander, I don't know, you are going to play more instants and sorceries there, but I just feel like there's, again, just better stuff you could be doing. Next is Welcome to the Fold. 2 blue, 2 generic. It's a sorcery and has a madness cost of 2 blue and X. Gain control of target creature if its toughness is 2 or less. If Welcome to the Fold's madness cost was paid, instead gain control of that creature if its toughness is X or less. Limited first, we'll talk about this. I love these effects in limited. The steal creature effects can be very swingy. They can really change a game, especially the permanent ones. Even if it's a small creature, you might be stealing a small creature that has a really strong ability, or you just might be stealing the blocker they have that they were going to chump block with that turn. And even better, if you can play this for the madness cost and get something bigger, fantastic. Definitely do it, right? So this is a card that's good early. It's a card that's good late. This is awesome, and I feel like if I'm in blue, yeah, I'm probably running this. I think it would be a pretty high draft pick for me as well. I just love these effects. These are also very good in Cube and fun in Commander too. As far as standard goes, maybe a sideboard card. I don't know if control decks want to necessarily main deck this, because they could be in a mirror or something where there's not a lot of creatures out there, or the creatures they're up against are hexproof creatures. So I don't know if I'm including this in my 60, but maybe 1 or 2 of these are in the sideboard in case I run into a creature heavy deck and I want to get some sort of momentum. Asylum Visitor. 1 black, 1 generic, vampire wizard, 3/1. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, you draw a card and lose a life. And it also can be played for madness of 1 black and 1 generic. So this one's a tough one. Let me say this. Let's talk about limited first. Paying 2 for a 3/1 isn't horrible, because if nothing else, it might just trade with a decent sized creature, and that's good. You got your value out of it in a lot of cases. So that's fine. It is a vampire, so there are some vampire synergies as well. And the fact that you can also play it for the madness cost means you can basically negate what is intended as a drawback in one of your other cards. So it's doing a lot already. And then on top of it, the ability can be good late game if you can empty your hand. Now, you empty your hand and you start drawing extra cards at the cost of 1 life. That is very, very good. So if you can get to that point, fantastic. Now, as far as the opponent goes, the opponent's going to hang on to a card, right? They're going to hang on to a land or whatever, so that this isn't going to trigger on their turn in most cases. Maybe you might sneak it in and get by with it one time or something, but for the most part, this is really only going to trigger on your turn. You have to kind of go in thinking that. So having said that, would I play it in limited? Sure, I would. There's enough upside here to play it. I'm very happy even if it trades with a 3 toughness creature. I feel like I got my value out of it. Standard, there's a lot of ifs and buts and wins when it comes to saying if this card's going to be good or not. if you can empty your hand, it's fantastic. But let's face it, in Standard, are you always looking to get Hellbent? No, you're probably hanging on to cards to deal with future threats. You have your removal, you have your cards like Dromoka's Command to deal with some of the enchantments that could come out now. Stuff like that. So this card just doesn't do a lot in those cases. So I think it's a little too inconsistent, unfortunately, for Standard. It feels like it should be awesome, right? It feels like, wow, Dark Confidant with upside. But I don't think it is. I feel like it's a little bit of a trap at least when you're talking about constructed. But I do think it is fine in limited, and I think it could be fun even Commander, where you can kind of politic with this card a little bit, and maybe some folks won't mind dropping their hand to let you draw an extra card, that type of thing. Could be interesting, but I think that's kind of where it will end up. Behold the Beyond. 2 black, 5 generic. This one's a mythic. It's a sorcery. Discard your hand, search your library for 3 cards, and put those cards into your hand. Then shuffle your library. So this is a little pricey, but let's talk about limited first. It's a decent limited card, because if you can cast this for 7, so you're probably now in the late portion of the game, and discarding your hand probably isn't that big of a deal, and in some cases may actually be a benefit to you in this format. And you get to basically tutor for 3 cards. Hey, that's awesome. So if you're not really far behind at that point, you're probably winning the game. So that's fantastic. Constructed, I'm looking at Standard. I think it's a little too pricey, unfortunately. It's a huge effect. It's a very powerful effect, but it's also a very expensive effect, which appears to be, at least so far, going to be a rather aggressive, maybe faster Standard format. So keep an eye on this card, maybe for the future for control deck, but I think for the most part it's going to be relegated to limited. As far as other formats, because this is a powerful effect, I do think you do want to think about formats that can cheat this out, like Legacy or Vintage, but I think there's other cards that do similar things that are better. Doomsday, for example, in Vintage is kind of doing something similar, but it's a lot cheaper at 3 black. So I don't really know if it's going to find a home outside of limited and maybe Commander. So if you are a Commander player and you want to try this out, it's a cool card. It'll be a good mythic for you, but unfortunately I'm afraid this might be another one of those mythics that you play in limited and that's kind of it. Next is Diagraph Colossus. 1 black, 2 generic, zombie giant, 2/2. When this enters the battlefield, it has a +1/+1 counter on it for each zombie card in your graveyard, and whenever you cast a zombie spell, you put a 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield tapped. Now this is a card I really like. It's another one of those kind of quasi-lord cards, and I really like the design here. But first off, limited. Yeah, I'm going to throw this into play, and maybe I can draft like a zombie deck, and this thing can be a house in that situation. It's another card, maybe I first pick it, and then I just try to grab up all the zombie relevant cards. But okay, it comes into play turn 3. You might not have a whole lot of zombies in your graveyard yet. If you have one, awesome, you get a 3/3 for this, but at the same time, as the game goes on and you start casting zombies and you're getting these extra zombie tokens, that can become really overwhelming really fast as long as you have enough zombies, right? So this is going to be awesome in draft. I think if you get the right sealed pool, it can be very good for you in sealed as well. You're just getting value out of it every time you put down a zombie, and that can be pretty good. Constructed, now it's hard to say right now just because we haven't seen a whole lot of the zombie stuff yet. I think there's going to be a lot more coming in the previews, but it's very possible. If the zombie deck is a thing in Constructed and Standard, then this would be a huge part of it. So it's a little early to tell. I do think it has a lot of potential to see some Standard play. As far as Commander goes, you have that zombie Commander deck. You wanted to throw another card in, this would be really fun, and a lot of cubes have zombie themes to them as well, and it will fit in there too. Gibbering Fiend, 1 red, 1 generic. It's a 2/1 devil, and when this enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if you have Delirium, it deals 1 damage to that player. This one wants me to say it's good. I don't know. Here's my only concern with this. First off, let's talk about limited. 2/1 for 2. Okay, sure, that's maybe alright. Just depends on my deck and how desperate I am for a 2-drop. There might be better 2-drops out there. It does do a point of damage when it comes into play, and if I get Delirium, then it continually does some damage, and that's not a bad thing at all. But again, we don't know how easy or hard it is going to be to get Delirium, especially if I'm playing an aggressive deck, which is going to be mostly creatures. Is it even ever going to happen for me? Who knows, right? Standard, I kind of have the same problem with this in Standard. On paper, this feels like this should be so good in the aggressive deck, right? Because you throw your hand down on the battlefield, you got a bunch of little creatures like this, and basically if you can get Delirium some way, somehow, even when you stall out and you can't get by anymore, these things are pinging your opponent for those last points of damage. That's what it feels like at first glance, but then you have to think, well, if I'm playing that aggressive deck, again, I'm playing a lot of creatures, and my spells, my instants and sorceries, I'm saving those in my hand till I need them. I can't really afford to necessarily run those out just to get Delirium, and even then, I still have to find a way to get some other type of card in the graveyard, whether that's a land or an enchantment or something. So it just starts to become a little bit awkward, and I just think there's better things you could be doing. You just be going in with bigger, faster, aggressive haste creatures instead of using this. So I don't know. It feels like it wants to be good, but I don't know if it's going to quite get there, quite honestly. Next, we have another transform card. It's Village Messenger, 1 red, and it's a human werewolf, 1/1 with haste, and of course at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast, transform, and then it turns into Moonrise Intruder, 2/2 werewolf menace, and at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform. So my favorite thing about this card is the flavor text. I'm afraid it's bad news coming from the Village Messenger who's about to turn into a werewolf. That's awesome. So now, having said that, let's talk about the card a little bit. I think this is good in limited. You're going to put this down, maybe get in some early damage, and if it flips, then 2/2 menace is actually quite good, especially in the early part of the game in limited. You could get a fair amount of damage across early just with this one card. So I think this is fantastic in limited. I'd be very happy to play it. Standard, I just think it's a little too slow again, and there's a lot of good aggression cards out there. So is this one of them? I mean, it does have haste, which is nice, but the fact that I have to wait until nobody plays a spell on a given turn to turn this into a 2/2 with menace. If I'm the aggressive deck, I want to play spells on every turn, including turn 2, especially turn 2, so I don't want to take a turn off to try to flip this. I'm really relying on my opponent not having a play, maybe turn 2 or turn 3, or even turn 1 if I'm on the play. Now, if they don't have a play, this card's awesome. If they do have a play, this card becomes very bad very quick. This could potentially be a card that does see standard, maybe sideboard play, to board in when you're on the play and take out when you're on the draw. That wouldn't totally surprise me. So keep an eye on this one. I mean, it could make it there, at least in the sideboard capacity, but there are a lot of good aggressive cards that it's competing with. Next is Briar Bridge Patrol, 1 green, 3 generic, human warrior, 3/3, and when this deals damage to 1 or more creatures, investigate. At the beginning of each end step, if you sacrifice 3 or more clues this turn, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, also notice that it doesn't say, like, activate the clues, you just have to sacrifice them. So even if you had to sacrifice them to another card for something, and not actually spend the mana and draw the card ability, it still counts for this, which is definitely noteworthy. So, limited, yeah, I'll play this in limited. I don't mind playing a 3/3 for 4 in limited, and just the fact that I like that first ability a lot in draft and sealed, because now my opponent's going to think, well, if I attack in and he blocks with this, then he's going to get a investigate token. Yeah, so they have to really think twice about their attacks, or I can just start attacking with this thing, and they're going to have to think twice about chump blocking, or even just even trading with this, because they might worry about the card advantage for you. So I think that's pretty cool, even if the second ability never comes into play. As far as standard goes, I don't know where it fits. It's a human. It could be part of a human deck. I was saying earlier, we're looking for good humans to put in a deck. Investigate tokens, I don't think you want to put all your eggs in that basket, especially with a 4-drop. And I like the quasi like natural order like ability that's on there. And this does combo well with cards like Tamio's Journal and stuff like that, I guess. But I don't know. I don't know if that's good enough to quite be reliable in standards. Obsessive Skinner, 1 green, 1 generic. It's a 1/1 human rogue, and when this enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if you have Delirium, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So, limited first, this is a Grizzly Bear with upside. I'm happy with it. I'll be more than glad to play it. And in the long run, if I can get Delirium, it becomes a very slow but grindy path to victory, and my opponent's going to have to deal with it. So I like that a lot, and it's an uncommon. As far as Standard goes, I think it's a little too slow for Standard. I think it's cool, but let's face it, even if I can get Delirium pretty quick, it's still a rather fragile creature on its own. And then I have to have targets for the Delirium that matter, and so on and so forth. So it's a little too situational, I think. But cool limited card. Next is Second Harvest. 2 green, 2 generic. It's an instant. For each token you control, put a token onto the battlefield. That's a copy of that permanent. Alright, so first off, the obvious. Clue tokens are everywhere. This is going to play very well with clue tokens, although you still have to have the mana to sacrifice the clue tokens. So at some point that might become diminishing returns. On top of that, there's zombie tokens. Now I think that's where this could really shine. We've seen some cards that already generate zombie tokens, and I'm sure we'll see more. And in this case, this type of effect is going to be amazing with a card like that. So those are the type of opportunities you have to look for in Limited. If you're drafting a heavy zombie deck and you're going into green and you can afford to play this card and it happens to come up in your draft, awesome. You get a sealed pool with a lot of zombies and you can do a Golgari build, awesome. It's going to be great for you. Once you get into Standard, I think it's a little too inconsistent for Standard, because then you're all in on having tokens, and if you don't have the tokens there for some reason, then this card's a dead draw. You don't really want that, especially considering it's 2 green, 2 generic. It's not the easiest thing to cast either, so I don't really see it there. But I will say we'll probably know more next week when we see the rest of the set spoiled, because if there's a lot of great token generating creatures out there, this card will become better and might become Standard playable. But at least as of today, I think it's more of a limited card. But where this really shines is Commander. I think you could do some really cool things in Commander with this. There's a lot of token Commander decks out there that already are running tons of different types of tokens, spirit tokens, wolf tokens, zombie tokens, you name it, and this is just a great complement to that. And imagine playing this with like doubling season. It'd be insane. So that's where I think this card's going to be really fun. But either way, Commander, cubes, I would want to have this in a cube if I have a token strategy in the cube. So I think it will still see a lot of play in a number of formats. That brings us to the last card of the day, Silver Fur Partisan. 1 green, 2 generic. It's a wolf warrior, 2/2 with trample, and when a wolf or werewolf you control becomes the target of an instant or sorcery spell, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. It's kind of like a heroic werewolf, which is kind of awesome. So limited, yeah, I'd play this in limited. It's a 2/2 for 3, which feels like a little icky, but at the same time, I don't care, because I'm hopefully going to have a lot of ways to target this with combat tricks or maybe even some auras, whatever, but it's going to help me get some 2/2 green wolf tokens into play. If my opponent wants to get rid of it, I'm getting value just because I'm basically getting a wolf token out of it. As far as Standard goes, it might be a little too early to say. I'd like to see more of the werewolf cards before I kind of make a decision. I mean, right now, as of today, I'd have to say no. I don't think there's enough support for this type of card. I mean, obviously there isn't like a heroic thing going on, at least not yet anyway, from what we can tell in the cards that have been spoiled. But it's still a nice effect, and if you have a lot of ways to target it or repeatedly target it, it could be very good. So keep an eye on this one. We'll have a better idea next week when the full set's spoiled if this is Standard playable. But right now is a great limited card, if nothing else. And I could even see this making its way into some cubes or even Commander. Well, we got there. Tried to go pretty quick through those 19 cards. The video didn't take forever. So thank you all, as always. If I missed anything, because I did go pretty fast, definitely put it in the comments below so we can discuss it. But hey, as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.